What's up, everybody? Welcome back to some Chad Daybell discussion. And in this case, it's been interesting to see family members and friends coming out and testifying against Chad Daybell. And today is no different. One of his very close friends and kind of a family member by marriage comes and testifies against Chad Daybell to when his beliefs changed, how his actions changed, how his description of his wife and their relationship changed, all culminating in a marriage he didn't want anybody else to know about. He, in my opinion, starts to put the final nail in the coffin for Chad Daybell. As this story continues to come together, it's going to be very hard, in my opinion, for the jury to be able to look past much of anything to think Chad Daybell was not involved in this conspiracy. The defense still has work to do, but we're going to break down the testimony of Chad Daybell's old friend on today's video. Make sure you guys hit that like button and subscribe to our page if you haven't already. We are about to jump into the direct examination of Chad Daybell's brother-in-law. He is married to Tammy's sister. So you can imagine how Tammy's sister feels about Chad Daybell. She testifies right after him, and it goes about how you'd expect. But I think the jury can understand that woman probably hates Chad Daybell, is understandable for most of us that may think Chad Daybell had something to do with Tammy Daybell's death. But the reason I thought this witness was so interesting is it really seemed like he and Chad were close friends. They went to the same church. It seems like he, again, almost looked up to Chad. Chad would tell him things. They would share experiences together. They were close. They would confide in each other. And those confidences are going to be spilled today in court. He's going to discuss what Chad Daybell was really about, how things changed, and why he thinks they changed, and what actions followed this change in belief, and the way that he spoke and the way that he acted, coming from someone who I believe through his testimony was incredibly smart and credible. This was one of the witnesses I think John Pryor got least out of in Cross. Basically, he agreed they didn't tell the family they were going to exhume Tammy's body. But this guy knew what he was talking about, didn't have anything to hide, wasn't pushing an agenda, no impeachment, wouldn't testify to something unless he was sure about it. So let's hear what he was sure about between he and Chad Daybell.
One-on-one talks or conversations where you might confide in one another.
We had a lot of backing up. We have a lot of talks where we would talk about different issues with regards to family, with regards to religion, with regards to just about anything. And I felt like we had some really deep conversations in regards to a number of things, just as two good friends and brother-in-laws would.
Was there ever a time that Chad expressed to you any concerns about his marriage to Tammy?
I don't want to say concerns at that time, but you have your relationships that you have with your spouse, and there are times where you don't always get along. And so we might have discussed and talked about some of that.
Did Chad ever discuss with you his intimacy with Tammy, his wife?
There were times he did.
What in particular would he discuss with you about that?
Jack, at this point, this isn't relevant.
Sustained.
So he says that Chad discussed his intimacy with Tammy Daybell. That was objected to. It's not relevant. I guess I could kind of see how it is relevant if you're having intimacy issues and you want to get rid of your wife. I mean, I kind of think that could be relevant, but judge doesn't let it come in. However, the questions continue and we get an idea of what he was going to say about their intimacy issues.
Was there anything specific in your discussions with Chad that he explained if he had concerns about his relationship with Tammy?
Just in the fact that I think he felt like at times it was a little vanilla. It was a little bland.
Is there anything specific Chad told you about his relationship with Tammy? It was a little vanilla. It was a little bland. Pretty sure that is responding to the intimacy issues, but he was just making it more generalized that their relationship, I guess, was a little vanilla, a little bland. So you can imagine. And to me, this does kind of go to motive, and we're going to connect it even more later when this guy's like, who the heck is Lori Ryan? Not Lori Vallow, by the way. They were told he married Lori Ryan. But when he's like, who the heck is she? And how Chad describes her to his brother-in-law connects back again to the motive and the story here of removing the stumbling blocks, removing the vanilla and bland relationship with your wife for something with a lot more sparks. What's the theory of the case? What's the theme of the case for the prosecution? Type it in the comment section now. We all know the theory and the theme, and they are hitting it on the head, every single witness. It's consistent and it's pointing to that theme and that theory.
What did he mean by, what did he say about that?
Just in certain aspects of the relationship, that it was just a marriage of just, we have a lot of routine, just general routine that we go through.
And
Did
that's
you
not
and
like so damning. People have that. People complain about that. You go through phases, you go through seasons. I get that. But when your wife ends up passing and you marry someone like that, it becomes more relevant.
Share the same religious views, generally speaking.
Generally speaking, while he was in Utah, yes, we did.
Had Chad ever confided in you or shared with you any experiences that he may have had in La Jolla, California?
He did.
Can you explain La Jolla? Yes. Can you explain to the jury, what did he tell you about that experience?
He said he had an experience that was a little life-changing in the fact that he was in the ocean. Large wave came in, a lot of rocks, smashed him against the rocks, chewed up his back pretty good. And it was one of those moments that you just don't forget.
And did he also share with you an experience that he had in
So
Flaming
Chad had
Gorge?
this experience at the beach where he was hurt. He shared that with him. It was kind of a normal, scary experience, but it grew. It became something more. And he's going to explain how and why.
Utah? Yes, he did.
Judge, I'm going to object at this point. This is becoming leading.
Overruled.
Yes, he did.
What was that experience?
Another experience in his youth where he was jumping off cliffs, and as he hit the water, he felt that his spirit separated from his body and become torn from his body.
Is that something that he'd explained to you originally?
He had talked to me about that.
Judge, could we get some foundation as to time, date?
Sure. Can you let the jury know, when did these conversations occur? What year? approximately?
Conversations occurred early 2000s when we would have conversations about that.
And we'll get to it later, but was there a later time that you also discussed these?
We did discuss these later. Yes.
But in the early 2000s is what you're saying as to these two conversations, is
Yes.
that right?
I'm going to have you, Mr. Rickson, as well as you, Mr. William, just please slow down a little bit and try not to talk over the top of each other for our record. Thank you.
Sure. At some point in time, did Chad's religious views change?
I believe they did.
Let's first explain to the jury, when did you first start seeing this kind of a change?
I would say at the time he started writing his books.
Can you pin it down to an approximate year?
If I were to put an approximate year to it, I would say 2006 to 2007.
In what way did his religious views change?
They became more focused, hyper-focused on preparing end of times, things of that nature.
When you use the word hyper-focus, what do you mean by that?
I think as a general rule, most people involved in our religion have a tendency to try to round out the religious information they receive. And in this case, by saying hyper-focused, I would say that it became more of an obsession and more than normal.
At any point in time, during the time,
This is before he met Lori Vallow. Okay. This is before she could have manipulated him. This is before she could have done anything to be the ringleader here. Instead, Chad's views changed. They're going to revert back to some of those stories, but this was before, this is pre-Lori Vallow. Why is this important? He wasn't manipulated. He didn't have the wool pulled over his eyes. He was the one hyper-focused on end times, writing books, speaking at events, doing podcasts. And that's important when you're trying to convict him and not Lori Vallow to connect these kinds of dots. And who better to do that than somebody who was in his church, who was closely aligned with him religiously, who talked to him about a lot of things, who shared a lot of things with him. And again, his credibility was not affected at all by cross-examination, in my opinion. Let me know if you guys disagree in the comments. But for somebody prior couldn't chip away at his credibility, this is very damning testimony.
this time frame, did Chad ever express to you a feeling that he had received visions?
He did.
And approximately when did he first start expressing that to you?
Probably around 2010, 2011.
What types of visions did he tell you that he was having?
They were visions regarding how things were going to play out in the last days.
Again, pre-Lori Vallow. And on Cross, Pryor's like, people can have visions, right? You believe that stuff? He's like, well, I mean, I guess they can. They can have, what did he call it? Inspiration and personal inspiration. But usually I don't think they have visions where you tell other people what to do, basically, because that's coming too. And everything John Pryor had a question for, I thought this guy had a really good answer.
At some point in time, did Chad again visit with you about this experience from Flaming Gorge and La Jolla, California?
Yes, he did.
Did anything about the experiences as he shared them with you change?
Originally, there were experiences that you have that are impactful. They soon became near-death experiences as opposed to just something that was impactful.
Could you explain a little bit more about that to the jury as to what Chad would explain when he couched them as near-death experiences?
Originally, when the stories were told, it was an experience that happened, and then it became an experience that happened in La Jolla, where I had an experience where I saw a relative that had deceased and passed on. And then the experience in Flaming Gorge became my body and spirit were torn and the veil was ripped and I could see into the heavens and into the eternities.
Was there anything about that change?
So, and this is pretty common actually. I've actually had a client who, it was a criminal case and he was radicalized to a certain religion, and what kind of sparked that, he had no real interest in it before, besides, nationally speaking, with family ties to it, but a near-death experience caused him to, really go far into that direction, and to where he made some bad decisions. And so Chad is trying to turn those, negative experiences where he was injured, maybe it was scary, whatever, into this huge experience that was life changing, that he could write about and talk about and give credence to, why he was now this visionary and this spiritual prophet. And this guy is connecting those dots. This guy who was around when the stories happened. He heard the first version of the stories and he heard the new version. He saw how Chad was twisting it and using it and changing it, and he can testify to it all. It's pretty interesting to have somebody that can connect all those dots.
That you were concerned by?
Yeah.
What was that?
That it wasn't consistent, that it just became more of a narrative now.
From that point forward, did you continue to see Chad's religious views change?
I did.
In what way?
It again started focusing more on end times, more on what would happen in America, what would happen with things in the future.
When did he first start expressing his views on those things?
That would have been around 2013, 2014.
And could you be a bit more specific about the nature of what he was telling you?
He got involved with other authors. They started to publish books and write books. They would talk about, in particular,
Judge, I'm going to object at this point, unless there's some foundation that establishes how he knows this rather than this narrative.
Same.
Can you just isolate your comments to things that you heard directly from Chad?
Chad Daybell told me there would be 2 earthquakes that would happen. There would be the Wasatch wake-up quake.
And Judge, could I have some foundation as to when this discussion supposedly took place?
So now he's predicting natural disasters. And you might think, why? Why would he be doing that? What's the big deal? Well, just wait. What's the theme? It's not just sex. It's not just money, but also power, control.
Is that an objection?
That's an objection,
Prior-
Judge.
Overruled.
Go ahead, please.
These conversations started in 2013, 2014, and continued on until he left to go to Idaho and continued on past that.
And I think before we had an objection, I'd ask you to explain to the jury kind of the nature of the things he was telling you about his change of view.
I was informed that there would be earthquakes, that there would be destruction in America. I was informed that there would be invading troops that would come from various different countries into the Americas.
Did those views that he shared with you, did they cause you any concern?
Sure.
In what way?
Well, it's a fear tactic.
What do you mean by
Judge, I'm going to
part?
object. It calls for speculation.
Overruled.
You may continue.
So what is it?
In my opinion, it's a fear tactic. It's a way
It's
to
a fear tactic. It's a way to control. It's a way to manipulate. And who was doing it? Not Lori Vallow, pre-Lori Vallow, Chad Daybell. Now, I think Lori Vallow was manipulative and had some control over some people and was able to expand Chad Daybell's horizons in more ways than one. But this guy and some other witnesses as well, but I thought he articulated it really well, was leaving no doubt Chad Daybell was doing this pre-Lori Vallow.
to let people know I know more than you, and therefore you should listen to me.
Why did you perceive it that way?
I perceived it that way because when you bring up anything on a natural disaster, it has a tendency to create fear. When you bring in wars and rumors of wars, it creates fear.
Eventually, I think you said Chad and his family moved to Idaho.
Yes,
And what year was that again?
2015.
At the time that he moved, had he invited you to move with him?
He had.
Can you explain to the jury how that request went and why he was asking you to come?
Towards the end of 2015, he expressed his desire for my wife and I and family to move up to Idaho so that we could be in proximity with our families, with each other.
Did he say any more about that?
He felt that it would be good for us to move up there in order to escape the earthquakes and the desolation and the things that would happen in Utah.
He was trying to control them, trying to get them to move as well. How was he doing that? Using his prophecy of the earthquakes.
What was he telling you about what it would be like in Rexburg?
He said that Rexburg would be a city of light, place of refuge, place that people would want to come to and be at.
And what was your reaction when he asked you to come up?
My curiosity at first was piqued because I wanted to know. I don't want to be in the middle of a giant earthquake. So naturally, I thought, okay, this is something that might be of interest.
So again, how does this guy have credibility? He kind of believed Chad Daybell, no matter how crazy or random or weird or, whatever with his prophecies and sayings. He kind of believed him. So he was kind of interested in going with him at first.
Did you take stock in any of his visions? Did you believe any of those things?
Originally, yes, I did.
At that time, were you still embracing maybe some of what he was teaching?
During that time frame, yes.
So why did you eventually not move up to Idaho?
Didn't feel it was right.
Any specific reason why?
There were things that were going on that to me, it didn't feel right. We had opportunity to visit. Idaho's a beautiful place and a great place for some. It just, for us, wasn't going to be a place that we needed to be at.
Did you tell Chad no, you weren't going to move?
We did.
Did he ever ask you to come up again?
He did.
How often would he ask?
Are you looking specifics or generality?
Well, generality first, then we'll go to specifics.
Generality, just whenever we could. And we did go visit. We had opportunity to go attend family functions and events up there.
Did he ever ask again for you and your family to move to Idaho?
There was a letter that was written to me
When was that letter written?
in 2016.
And that was a letter from who?
That was from Chad.
What did he say in that letter?
In that letter, he essentially told me that we needed to be in Idaho.
Did he say why he believed that?
He said we needed to be in Idaho because within the next 3 years, there would be a giant earthquake that Springville and my house would be shaken to the ground and destroyed, and that we needed to escape that destruction before that happened.
Imagine your brother-in-law writing that letter to you. I'd be like, dude, like, where are you getting this? Like, I just on your vision? Like, I don't know. That'd be crazy. I mean, if it was real, obviously I'd be like, all right, bro. Like if the earthquake came, then of course, maybe I'd be like, all right, I got to listen, but that would be wild. But listen to how he reacts to it, because listen to how Chad pushes it for control.
Did he claim that to be part of his visions?
Yes,
Did he say anything about concerns he might have had with your wife?
he did.
What did he say?
He'd informed me that she was allowed to go south and that the spirits, in particular the dark spirits, would allow her to go south to do whatever she wanted to do, but she was not able to come to Idaho to see the glory and the visions that would happen, and that she more or less was being held back.
What did you take that to mean?
I took that to mean that she was being controlled by dark spirits.
How did you react to him telling you?
Sounds like he was saying Tammy's sister was also dark. And again, this is pre-Lori Vallow. Okay, that's what's so important about this witness. Chad Daybell was doing this stuff, trying to get his buddy to come with him to Idaho, the light city. If his wife didn't want to come, leave her behind. And he was offended by that. I get it. I would be too. Duh.
That or
I wasn't-
addressing that? Sorry.
I wasn't thrilled
Why not?
because I have a responsibility and a stewardship over my family. That's not Chad's responsibility.
Can you explain to the jury that word stewardship as you're using it? What do you mean by that?
When I'd say the term stewardship would be an ownership or a responsibility or a something of that nature. That is my duty and my job, my responsibility.
You just use the word ownership. You're not. Are you suggesting that you feel like you own your family?
I wouldn't say that I own my family, but I have a responsibility to them.
Is the idea of stewardship something that is mainstream to the LDS Church?
Yes.
Why were you offended by Chad's statements about your wife and dark spirits relative to your stewardship?
I felt that he was trying to take a stewardship over my family and trying to tell us what we needed to do, where we needed to be.
Did you?
So he was trying to control your family, but also, what do we think about Chad's stewardship over his family and Lori's family and over Tammy and the responsibilities and duties that he may have had there? And what he did with those duties and what eventually was his decision-making reason for what he was going to do with those duties?
express any concerns to Chad about that?
Not at the time.
Did you ever, I'll withdraw that. I think you explained that there were some times after they moved to Rexburg that you would come up and visit them.
Yes.
Was there ever a time that, I'll withdraw that. When you come to visit, what would Chad tell you?
He would, at that time, we didn't talk in depth.
So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit to when he says his interactions with Tammy were like.
Chad and myself. Interaction was happening, but Chad seemed withdrawn.
What do you mean by that?
He wasn't engaging in the general conversation of the group.
Was that something that was abnormal for,
I did.
did you bring it up with anybody or with Chad?
I didn't bring it up with Chad. Didn't have an opportunity to. I noted it with my wife.
Were there any other interactions that you had in 2018 with Chad and Tammy?
Down home, running errands. My wife called me. I was stunned.
Tammy's passing?
No.
When did you first learn of Tammy's passing?
I was down home running errands. My wife called me and informed me that Tammy had passed away.
What was your reaction when you heard that news?
I was stunned.
Why were you so stunned?
I had seen Tammy 2 weeks prior, and it didn't seem that somebody of her age in her condition should have passed.
Where had you seen her to?
So he had seen her 2 weeks prior to her death, and somebody at her age and her condition should not have been passing. It was shocking to him. Again, this is another witness saying the same thing, but thought it was interesting again, especially with how little John Pryor was able to crack into his credibility on cross.
2 weeks prior.
Tammy came to my house and stayed with my wife and I.
What was the occasion?
On that occasion, she was coming down to visit family and parents.
And you noted that part of why you were stunned was because of Tammy's condition. Will you elaborate on that for the jury, please?
For what I had observed, she was healthy. She seemed happy. She didn't seem to have anything that would cause her to die. Not that I'm an expert in that.
At that point in time, had you noticed whether or not Tammy had put on any significant weight or lost any significant weight?
I did not feel she had changed.
What did you do once you were processing this with respect to hearing of Tammy's death? What was the next thing that you did?
So again, not something that he was expecting based on her quote unquote condition, meaning she was in good condition. And yet this happened to her.
8 pounds, blonde, worked out, physically fit, hairdressed.
hold on.
That conversation.
I
Yes,
jumped
did.
the gun
What
a
did
little
you say,
bit.
Tim?
So then he was shocked at what happened to Tammy. And then he was even more shocked when he heard that Chad Daybell was remarried. And you just heard a little spoiler alert of how Chad Daybell explained his new wife to his brother-in-law and close friend. But we're going to listen to this explanation again and just put yourself in the shoes of the jury. What do you think is going across your mind when you hear that this is how Chad Daybell explained his new wife after telling his brother-in-law about his vanilla and bland marriage with Tammy Daybell?
So this is the first opportunity to talk. I'm not surprised that that was what he would tell me.
How did you react to that when he said that?
At that time, I thought within a month, maybe, of a wife passing when he was as close as he was to his spouse. Conversation
back
was
it
such
up.
that he asked if I had been talking to Heather Daybell, and I said,
All right. So,
And so at these-
there's some other context that I think is interesting too, is Chad's telling him, like warning him about other people might be compromised, et cetera, when he tells him about his new wife, Lori Ryan, not Lori Vallow.
How are you related to Heather Daybell, just to put it in perspective?
to put it in perspective, Chad's brother Matt married Heather, making her Chad's sister-in-law. And so at these family functions, if it was extended, we would see her. We were cordial. I didn't have anything against her, but we weren't close by any means.
Did you ever, in that phone call that you made to Chad a month after the funeral, did you ever ask him why he was asking if you talked to Heather?
Conversation was such that he asked if I had been talking to Heather Daybell, and I said no. He had said, well, she's spreading rumors about me in Rexburg, Idaho. So I asked why. And he said, well, it's not important, but while I was in Hawaii, I got married.
Was that the first time that you learned that he'd been married?
Yes,
Were you surprised by that?
very.
Why?
Because it is not common to marry somebody. At that time, I thought within a month, maybe, of a wife passing when he was as close as he was to his spouse.
Did you find it in any way unusual or not with respect to the fact that all this history of years of closeness with Chad that he hadn't told you before this, that he got married?
We hadn't had opportunity to talk, so this is the first opportunity to talk. I'm not surprised that that was what he would tell me.
How did you react to that when he said that?
I remember literally standing there and just not knowing what to say.
Did you eventually speak?
Yes, I did.
What did you say to him and ask him about that?
I asked him the first thing that came to my mind, which is, who is she?
What did he say?
He told me her name was Lori Ryan.
Had you ever heard that name before?
I had not.
Did he tell you in that conversation when he had married Lori Ryan?
In that conversation, he did not. He just explained who she was.
Did he describe her in any way, tell you anything about her?
He did.
What kinds of things did he tell you?
He explained that she was 5'6", 120 pounds, blonde, worked out, physically fit, hairdresser, and just an amazing individual.
He told her 5'6", 120 pounds, blonde, physically fit, hairdresser, amazing person. I wonder if he mentioned the storm. But what do you think the jury's got to be cringing, right? They have to be cringing.
Did he mention anything about her family background?
He had mentioned that her husband had died of a heart attack earlier in 2019.
Lie. We all know that.
Did he say anything about her children, if she had children or didn't have children?
I asked him if he had children, and he said that she had some grown children, but that was it.
Lie. We knew she had young children too. No longer with us. But again, just blatant, bold-faced lies that he's telling to his family.
At that point, had you ever heard of JJ and Tylee's names?
No.
Anything else in that conversation that stood out to you?
In particular, nothing that was of note other than I was still trying to process that he had been married, and I wanted to know when he had gotten married, but he had not shared that with me.
In the days that followed, did you have another conversation with Chad?
We did.
When was the next conversation?
The next conversation was a day or two later. I'm not specific on what day it was.
And what was that conversation about?
The conversation for me was mainly trying to find out information of when did you get married?
So did you call him? Did he call you?
I called him.
Did you call and ask him that question?
I did.
What did he say?
He informed me at that point that he had been married on November 5th.
Did he say anything else about his marriage?
Not a lot about the marriage itself.
I want to back up. Back on November 19th, did Chad ever ask you to do anything about this information that he'd been married?
You know, when he did share that information with me, the one item that was a little surprising was that he asked me not to tell anybody.
Did he give you an explanation as to why he didn't want you to tell anybody?
He just said, don't let anyone know. And I informed them he needed to call our in-laws and let them know. And he just didn't give him information. He didn't give a reason.
So he also wanted to keep it a secret. And when this guy's wife, Tammy's sister, testifies next, I believe she said the way that she put it was, he didn't tell us her real name. He said Lori Ryan, not Lori Vallow, because she had either a checkered or a misunderstood past, to say the least. So this is the testimony that the state is basically coming with every day in this case. And while at times we've talked about ways and areas that John Pryor has been able to cross-examine and pick apart and maybe poke some holes here or there, they are building a rock-solid case and continue to. And so I wanted to highlight this witness today because as I watched, I was like, ooh, just thinking one after the next. The hits keep on coming for Chad Daybell. But I found it really interesting. Hopefully you guys did too. Let me know what you thought of this witness. Who you think have been some of the stronger witnesses for the state in this case. I'd be interested in knowing that. And I appreciate any input you share, any questions you have, and I will try to get to them as we continue to cover this trial. Make sure you guys hit the like button before you leave. Thanks for joining me today, as always. Till next time, I'm out of here. Thanks for watching another episode of The Lawyer You Know. If you enjoyed the episode, please hit the thumbs up and share with your friends who may be interested here on YouTube. And don't forget to subscribe. You can also follow us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok. And don't forget to check out the Lawyer You Know podcast with new seasons dropping every quarter. If you have a case you want to talk to us about, if it's a personal injury case, wrongful death, catastrophic injury, car accident, or slip and fall case, please email us at lawyeryouknow@gmail.com. And of course, all these links I just mentioned are included in the description below on this episode and every episode. So until next time, this is Peter Tragos, The Lawyer You Know.